You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber, and this is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. Today, we have with us Congresswoman Kat Cammack. Now, she is an accomplished, some might even say unstoppable young leader, and someone who knows the rough side of struggle. Like the best leaders of our age, she knows hard work, resilience, and how to stay focused on victory until it becomes a reality. Today, Congresswoman Kat Cammack is the youngest Republican woman in Congress, representing Florida's 3rd District, and as a third-generation sandblaster who grew up on a cattle ranch, one that her family lost to Obama-era policies. That led her to a time with no home until Kat Cammack stood up, spoke up, and began fighting back, eventually taking grit, patriotism, and training from places like the Naval War College and running for Congress. Well, she won, and today she serves on committees ranging from Homeland Security to agriculture. She is a member of congressional caucuses supporting everything from law enforcement and free speech on America's campuses to sportsmen and the pro-life caucus. Please, with enormous gratitude, welcome Congresswoman Kat Cammack. So good to see you again. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. Heck, that was an awesome introduction. I'm going to take you with me on the road.
Oh, wonderful. Well, you know, you and I, Kat, we have spoken, and I think for our listeners today, I want to hear them first in your life before Congress and now in Congress. As I know you have shared this before, but I really think it's important and much appreciated by those listening. Can you begin sort of with a short version of your life story? Because you're from a ranching family, you know hard work yourself, and you know how hard it is to run a small business, and harder even under the Obama and now Biden era restrictions, which are, you know, high taxes and other burdens. Tell us about the time that you spent at the Naval War College and those experiences really struggling with your family business to make ends meet that really brought you to where you are today. And your innate patriotism, I think, in my view, it almost seems like a crucible in which your personal values and your will to fight were formed. So can you take us through that personal story?
Yeah, daughter of a single mom, and, grew up very working class, blue collar, didn't have a whole lot. It was just me, my mom, my sister. And I wasn't raised in an overly political home. My mom voted, but didn't really talk a lot of politics. But growing up in a small family business, especially, one that is very niche, commercial sandblasting and monuments, you have to have multiple hats on at all times. And so I grew up at the shop, took my first steps at the shop in the sandlot. And it was a great way to grow up, just having experiences that not every kid had. We were doing everything from, I was mopping floors and, doing everything as a small kid, and then was, making out, deposits for the bank. And then I was balancing the books, and then I was, working on taxes and making sales and, working on job sites. And so I had kind of learned, just by virtue of being around, how government really didn't work for small businesses. I saw OSHA inspectors, DOL inspectors, EPA inspectors, dealing with taxes. I never had that conversation with my mom about big government, but I knew that the more that government interfered with our lives, the harder it was to make ends meet. And I can't tell you how many times I saw my mom go without a paycheck, where she would pay her employees first and pay the bills, and then, nothing was left for her or for us. And, that's part of being a business owner. And so I think naturally I was being conditioned of, seeing firsthand, this is why small government is so important, because small businesses want to do right. They want to do well. They want to reinvest in communities. They want to support families in the community. But it's hard to do when you're constantly getting slapped down by big government. And so I really had that growing up. I was competitive in sports. I was competitive in rodeo. And fun fact, I was the mutton busting champion for the state of Colorado when I was 6. And for all of you who don't know what mutton busting is, that's when you ride a sheep.
Wow.
So that is yeah, that's an unknown fact that now you guys know. And wasn't until I was in college. I was the first in my family to go to college and worked my way through. I was working 2, 3 jobs while cheering and being involved in school. I was my student trustee for my university. Found out that we were losing everything. It was April of 2011, and I was 1 month out from graduation. Found out that we had 23 days to evict, and it was like a nuclear bomb went off in my world. And next thing I know, we're packing everything that we own into a horse trailer, and we're asking friends and neighbors, hey, will you take our horses? Will you take our cows? We're doing everything that we can. And we ended up being homeless for several months. And that's when I got the call from a family friend. And he said, my uncle is running for Congress in Florida, and I think you'd be a good fit. And I remember thinking, I do not know how to run a campaign. I don't, but hey, I'm not married, I don't have kids. And that's what he said. He's like, if there's ever a time in your life you can do something crazy, like move across the country, this is it. And then you can figure out your next step. And so I did. I moved across the country to Florida and started working on a campaign for a guy named Ted Yoho. And he was a large animal veterinarian. So he was still practicing while running for Congress. And it actually worked out well because I grew up on a ranch. So I knew my way around farm animals, and was doing everything as a vet tech assistant while also running the campaign. So we would be in between interviews. And I remember one time we did a house call and castrated mini ponies, if you can believe that. And so it was just a wild experience. And we ended up winning by 829 votes. It was really a wake-up call that I think was happening across the country, people who had just had enough of big government. And I really saw it as my way to affect change in the process, because the process had been broken for so long. And I, being homeless, was a direct result of that. It was, people not reading the bills. It was multiple issues being jammed into these massive conglomerate comprehensive packages. And it was government always thinking that more government was the answer. And so I got involved as his deputy chief after we won the race, and served North Central Florida for the last 8 years. It's where I met my husband, Matt, who's a firefighter and a SWAT medic. And we don't have any babies yet, but lots of chickens and ducks. And he's wonderful. He's very supportive, helps with all of our campaigns, and was very, very patient when I made my way through the Naval War College, which was 3 years of a lot of work while working a full-time job and campaigning for my boss at the same time. So it was an incredible experience. Wow. Being the only civilian. I had the opportunity to be in class with just wonderful, wonderful patriots, servicemen and women. Everyone was either from the Marines or the Navy. It was quite the experience. And my train of thought with going to the Naval War College was, one, I come from a military family and I didn't have the opportunity to serve, but I also wanted to have the knowledge of acquisitions, appropriations, war gaming, planning, war termination. If you are going to be a legislator or a staffer for a legislator who makes that very serious decision to declare war, you had better know how, from beginning to end and everything in between, from preparation and readiness to strategy to the history, you better have some knowledge of that. And so that's what really inspired me to go to the Naval War College. And as I said, as the only civilian, it was pretty incredible. It was an honor and an experience that I wouldn't change for the world. And let me tell you, being in politics, knowing how to plan a war, they're basically one and the same, it almost seems like. And then with what we've seen here in the last few months, the awful, just terrible botched withdrawal in Afghanistan, being able to have some very in-depth conversations with Secretary of Defense and other high-ranking individuals, that knowledge has proved to be invaluable as we work to get our Americans home. So that's just a little bit about me. And thanks again for
so
having me on.
inspiring. Yeah, this is, the reason why I love for you to share that story, Congresswoman. It is such an inspirational story. And it's really the story of the American resilience and the American dream. And it really has been kept alive by your family with all of the risk and reward. And then you really took it to a whole new level, in effect. You did what very few people do. You ran for Congress and you won. So that is really terrific. And I think the message here for anybody listening is it's never too late. No matter where you're at in life, you can make changes. And there are always good things. I think the best is yet to come. I love to have that attitude about life. So thank you so much for sharing. Now, Congresswoman, we did see sort of a national awakening, I like to call it, by traditional Americans, both Republican and Democrats, but especially by parents who were concerned about their schools. I think Americans are really becoming sick and tired of the wild federal spending that we're seeing, the inflation, totally public health safety has been totally bungled, foreign policy, as you mentioned, completely botched pullout from Afghanistan. And people are really beginning to wake up. They're beginning to see, I think, courageous people around them, people like you, and that makes others want to act and defend. And we here at AMAC, we're always going to defend smaller government, lower taxes, stronger borders. The November 2nd elections, though, I want to talk about that, especially in Virginia. And of course, nationally, we see the same trend. It seems almost like there's a turning point right now in America, an inflection point, if you will, as if Americans are awakening. And I'm curious how you see those election results in Virginia. And what do you think the biggest issues are that are facing our country at this moment? But first, if you could comment on those, the Virginia election.
Yeah, I got to say, the Virginia election was incredible. I had the opportunity to actually, I was in Washington that week. And so I grabbed a couple of colleagues and we drove down for the victory night party with Glenn Youngkin. And I wanted to see, the supporters that turned out for him. And, earlier that day, I had been actually making phone calls, encouraging people to get out and vote. Please make sure you get out and vote in Virginia. And the people who had been answering the calls were not your typical voters. They were folks that had either never voted before, or maybe they voted once many years ago. And it was incredible, some of the conversations that I had. So I had this inkling that something very different was happening in Virginia. And then when I went to the election night party with Glenn Youngkin and his family and all of his team, we walked into the room where they had all their supporters. And it looked like America. It was incredible. It was moms, there was kids, there were seniors, there were police officers, there were firefighters, there were farmers for Youngkin. I mean, there was a banner for every single person in there. And it really was the most diverse, incredibly energized group of people that had nothing in common other than that they loved their country, they loved their state, and they wanted to make a difference. And that to me was kind of the wake up call. And I remember leaning over to my friend Byron Donalds, who's a representative from South Florida. And I said, "Are you seeing this?" And he said, "This is crazy." I said, "If this is the canary, this is one hell of a canary, because this is, as I said, it was America. It wasn't one group. It wasn't one gender. It was a hodgepodge of different people coming together for a cause." And then, of course, later that night, we saw in New Jersey almost the flip of the governor's race there. We saw, longtime state senators were losing their seats. But the thing that really resonated that we found in the days that followed the Virginia election, it was the fact that over 200 school boards flipped to conservative. And that was a direct result of parents who really got to the point of, "I've had enough." And they stood up and said, "No more." And the fact that 200 school boards flipped conservative tells you that parents, for the first time in a long time, were getting a good look at what their kids were being taught. and they didn't like it. And when they spoke up, they were told to sit back down. And if there's one thing I know, you don't tell a mama bear to sit back down,
That's
especially when
right.
you are messing with her cub. And so I think that is going to be a very, very strong driving issue going into the midterms is our
Mm.
kids, the engagement that happens between parents and school boards and teachers. That whole dynamic has gotten very sideways. And you see what's happening at the national level with Attorney General Merrick Garland sending the FBI to target parents. When the federal government is targeting parents who are showing up to the school board meetings after years of being encouraged to go, they start showing up. They don't like what they're hearing. They don't like what the outcomes are. And so they're speaking out and they're being labeled domestic terrorists. I don't think so. That's not going to happen,
Ridiculous.
not in our country. And so I think you're going to see a lot of engaged parents turning out because of that issue. But then you're also going to see people coming because there's just the fundamentals that government has failed. The fact that we don't have a secure border, we have a wide open border we're seeing criminals, known gang members, international terrorists, historic record levels of narcotics pouring into our communities. The fact that the crisis of the Southwest border has now resulted in every town in America being a border town, that to me is going to be a driving issue because every single person is impacted by the open borders in our country. And if you don't have a secure border, you don't have a secure nation, you can't have a sovereign nation. And so it's really the failure of the government and their lack of attention to the basics. They want to come after our constitutional rights. Our Second Amendment rights are under constant assault by this administration. And then you look at what's happening on college campuses, the assault on conservatives and free speech. It's really the fundamentals that we have got to get back to. And I think if we as conservatives focus on that, it'll be an overwhelming success in the midterms. But that is what I see as kind of being the driving issues going
I
into
agree.
midterms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that what we're seeing at the border is unprecedented. And when you recognize, as you said, it's not a border issue, a state border state issue. It's all 50 state issue. I do have some questions around that coming up in just a moment, but I do want to just make a point. You mentioned that when you were in Virginia at Youngkin's race and you saw the gathering of so many different people from so many different walks of life, that is what it makes America great. That is who America is. So don't let the people out there, the naysayers, the ones that are trying to, I think, drive fear into the hearts and minds of all Americans. Let's remember what we have in common. And the reason why I think that's so important for us to remind ourselves of that now is we're gathering with friends and relatives that we may not see all of the time, people with different opinions on things. And a piece of advice I would love to share is try to stick to the topics and the issues where there is common ground because we have so much in common rather than focusing on the differences that divide us. And
Yes.
I think that there's enough there that Americans can come together and get a lot of work done. There's a lot of common ground. There's a small minority that's acting like the majority today. And I think we're going to see things shift in 2022. So you have personally stood on so many issues from freedom of speech and the First Amendment to supporting all of our rights in our Bill of Rights. And you're strong in your pro-life stand. And our members really like that. I personally appreciate that too, Congresswoman. I want to just have you focus a little bit on why freedom of speech is so important and why it matters. And tell us a little bit what your caucus is going to do to help keep free speech on campuses. And then if we could, we'll talk a little bit about the unborn, because we treasure life itself and we're here to defend the unborn. So I want to ask you a question about the reversal of Roe v. Wade to see if you think maybe Democrats and pro-abortion members of Congress, how you think that they might respond.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, getting back to the basics, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, these are the tenets that our country was founded on. And when you look at the Bill of Rights and you look at our First Amendment, for example, and the 5 tenets that make up the First Amendment, speech being, I think the most critical, we have a responsibility to defend free speech that we agree with, but also the same speech that we don't agree with. Just as much as it's our right to speak it, we also have to be able and willing to hear differing opinions. And it's that kind of discourse that's going to yield the best ideas and the best results. But we're now in a time where people are so anxious and defensive and have lived in these safe spaces for so long that a differing opinion somehow is so abrasive to some people that they have to shut it down. And so you're seeing a lot of that happening on these college campuses. Now, I'm not sure if it's because, kids these days have been told that they all deserve blue ribbons and that everybody is special and everybody can be president of the United States. Of course, I think we can all agree that maybe we've taken that whole thing a little too far, given who our commander in chief is right now. But they get to college campuses and it's supposed to be a time for them to really explore who they are, really become resolute in their ideas and forming opinions. But instead, we're seeing a culture where free speech is being limited to certain areas of campus, which is interesting considering most of these college campuses are funded with taxpayer dollars. Then you're seeing these woke groups and these students that subscribe to a woke ideology or a more liberal left radical ideology being encouraged to explore these issues, and they're supported by tenured professors, by administrators, and by many student groups that are financed with student fees. And then you see the conservatives on campus who are being told, if you want to pass this class, you're going to write your papers with a liberal slant. You're not going to join conservative groups. You're going to keep your head down. You're not going to voice your opinion unless you want to be bullied, hazed, harassed, and shouted down and shouted out. And so I think that becomes the breeding ground where conservatives are suppressed and the liberals are encouraged. And then they graduate, and that same behavior, that learned behavior of it's okay for me to bully and harass this conservative because I don't agree with their ideas. They then take in the workplace that same attitude of I'm going to be the social justice warrior and push my ideas on everyone, and anyone who disagrees with me, they're automatically an ist, a racist, a sexist. They get into this name calling. And you wonder why we have so many community organizers and social justice warriors today. Well, I think it's because they got their training wheels in college, and no one ever had that check and balance on them when they were in very formative years of their young adult lives. And so you see conservatives then doing the same thing in the workplace, keeping their head down, not saying anything, not engaging. And then finally, it gets to a point where we have millions and millions of the so-called silent majority who are no longer willing to be silent. And I think why it's so important we have the Campus Free Speech Caucus that Jim Jordan and I are spearheading is because we're going to the source. We're going to the root of the issue, where free speech should be free for all. Regardless of your political ideology, it should be a free speech for all, regardless if you are conservative, if you are moderate, if you are liberal. You should have an opportunity to voice your opinions in a peaceful, respectful way that doesn't infringe on someone else's rights. And that is what the caucus is doing, is we're going after the worst campuses in the country, highlighting those administrations, basically giving them a guideline of if you want to, one, keep your federal funding, you're going to make changes to your school policies that protect students with differing opinions. You're going to bring in a diversity of speakers to campus. I can't tell you how many times Ben Shapiro, who's a very engaging, dynamic, young conservative guy, he goes and speaks at college campuses all around the country. It is almost like you need to call in the National Guard when he comes to town, because the students get so riled up. They accuse him and people who want to go see him of so many horrible, awful things, and they discourage students from attending. So we need to get it back into a mode where there's balance, where there is an exchange and a free flow of ideas on college campuses. Because if we don't, we're really setting the stage for what our society is going to look like. And you can see it on a college campus right now. If we don't
Yeah.
make these changes and really course correct, we're going to be headed for a bad place that I don't know if we could come back from. So that's why this work is so important.
Well, thank you for that, because, and it's the reason why we do this show and bring folks on like you, because it's so important that Americans understand the good work that you're doing and that others like you are doing. And this is exactly what needs to be happened, little by little, bit by bit. I think we can re-educate our youth. And as a friend of mine said to me, we don't teach them what to think, but how to think. And
Exactly.
unfortunately, young people are being told what to think. And, you know, this is just, I applaud your efforts there in that caucus. I do want to ask you about the Roe v. Wade reversal. Do you think that we might see a reversal there?
You know, it's an incredible time in our nation's history.
Hmm.
I had the opportunity to speak on the steps of the Supreme Court on the opening day of oral arguments. And it really has become a turning point in our nation's history. This Dobbs v. Jackson case is going to really become what I think is not only just a turning point, but a bookend of what are we willing to accept as a society? Because what we have said for many, many years, especially since Roe v. Wade, was that we don't believe in the science. We don't believe that even though it is an individual that is in the womb with its own DNA, its own unique fingerprint and identity, we don't believe that to be a life. That is what Roe v. Wade was. It was establishing that there's one person who has moral superiority in the case of those two individuals. And it was very, very concerning for me when I was growing up, thinking about this in the lens of, you know, I wasn't supposed to be here. And my mom gave birth to me against all odds. She had actually been told that she should abort me by both her doctors and her family. She was a high-risk pregnancy. She had been told after she gave birth to my older sister many years prior that because she had suffered a stroke, that she was very high risk and I would not survive and she would not survive. So I was given no chance of survival. And yet she chose life and pushed forward and carried me to term and was able to give birth to a very healthy 8-pound, 6-ounce baby girl with red hair. And yeah, red hair and teeth. You can imagine how that was. It's just been such a very interesting self-reflection that I've been going through as this case has started. I often question, who are we as a nation if we classify bacteria on Mars as life, but what they deem a clump of cells in the womb, it's not. Or if you look at the DOJ, they classify a pregnant woman who's been murdered a double homicide. So there's recognition of life there, but not if it's an abortion. And it gets to the root
Even
of
if it's in the 6th or 7th or 8th month for many on the far
Yes.
left, even if it's in
Yes.
the 9th month, which, you know, we see babies that are surviving beyond 20 weeks outside of the
Yeah.
womb. We see these babies that are more and more of these surgeries in utero are occurring, and these children are these surgeries are proving to be very successful. So there's viable life in the womb, and who's to know at what point a young developing infant feels pain. I think the Texas heartbeat bill was
Yes.
a wonderful, good thing, a good victory. It'll be very interesting to see what comes out of the Supreme Court. Do you worry that some of the Democrats, there's a senator from New Hampshire and of course AOC of New York, they appear to be threatening the Supreme Court, talking about revolution. I think they're undermining the High Court's legitimacy and independence. What do you think of that, of what their actions specifically?
Well, I mean, this is again what we're seeing that is the playbook of the left. If they don't like it, they're going to shout you down. They're going to intimidate, threaten violence, and then they're going to call into question your legitimacy. And then they're going to find ways to alter the existence. Of course, we know that there's a push right now on the left to pack the Supreme Court. They don't like the fact that we have a majority of Supreme Court justices that are pro-life. And this ruling, Dobbs v. Jackson, will again solidify that this is an independent individual in the womb, that life begins at conception, and addresses the issue of viability, as you just hit on. And that is a huge issue that takes us forward, that makes us progress as a nation. Because many years from now, we're going to look back, because the science is catching up to what we've known. We're going to look back and we're going to say, how could we have killed 62 million babies? We look back at the horrific practices and things that took place in our nation at its founding, and we say, wow, how did we let that happen? And we work to make it right, and we work to be better. And this is just another step where we look and we say, we're going to be better, and we're going to protect life, because every life is valuable. And so this is that turning point. And you see groups like the left, and you see politicians like AOC and company. They don't like it, so they're going to stomp their feet and bully, and they are going to push. And it's our job as conservatives, as Americans, to push back and say, no, enough is enough. And it is the reason why we need to have small government that is in a check and balance state, where we don't have an overreaching executive, where we have a balance in the Supreme Court, where we have actual legislation and rules and purse strings that are going through Congress the way that it was designed. Our founding fathers had a framework that was divine. And we have, as humans do, we have really tried to mess with it as much as possible. And that's why I think being a constitutional conservative is more important than ever, because it's back to the basics. And that's what's going to stop all this radical, liberal, leftist agenda that we continue to see pushed down our throats.
Yeah, we sure do. These are really good, very important points. And I think they're so vital for our republic into the future and to who we really are as Americans. So thank you. I do want to talk a little bit further, talk about so that we can understand a bit more about Homeland Security. So to many of us, the tragedy of the Biden open borders and their sort of abdication of moral and political leadership in protecting Americans along our southern border, it really just encourages drug traffickers, human traffickers, crime. We see COVID spreading and homelessness. And you have really been leaning forward on this issue and recently introduced a bill, HR 5683, entitled Return Border Patrol Agents to the Front Lines of the Border Crisis. Now, AMAC members are very concerned about the border crisis. How do you see the border crisis? You touched on it a few moments ago, but speaking more broadly, what do you think will get the Biden team to wake up and protect the border?
You know, I think that the Biden administration will never acknowledge what is happening at the border, because it flies in the face of a narrative that they have carefully crafted over many, many years. They accused President Trump of border crisis and gross violations of human rights at the border. And none of that was true. And so they have built up this entire narrative that they were going to come in and they were going to stop everything. Well, it's gotten 10 times worse under their watch. We're seeing human trafficking of children. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, my very first border trip, I met a 9-year-old little girl who had been gang raped so violently that her vocal cords had given out from screaming. And it was Border Patrol agents that picked her up out of a field. Do you think that Biden has acknowledged any of these stories, any of these atrocities that are occurring on our soil by illegals and criminals? No. He wants to pretend that this is a climate change something or another, and that it is somehow our duty to take and grant amnesty to the millions of people that are coming here. Well, the thing that's very curious to me is that facts, which are very inconvenient to this administration, when you look at the 141 different nationalities that are coming through our southwest border, number 9 most apprehended is Romania. Do you know what it takes to get to the southwest border from Romania? It's not a walk. You can't take a train. It is planes and barges and boats, and it is a horrific journey. And so this is a direct result. You can talk to any Border Patrol agent, from the deputy chiefs to the rank and file boots on the ground. This is the worst that they have ever seen from a public health standpoint. You have people with TB, with COVID, with every disease imaginable coming across. And on shift at every sector, there's 9 across the entire Southwest border. There's only 2 medical contractors that they have available. So people are coming through with a litany of different diseases, and we have no way to treat them, no way to help them except to overrun our local hospital facilities, which in turn takes Border Patrol agents off the line. Now, you also look at what's happening with the coyotes and the drug runners. We have close to 500,000 gotaways just this year alone. Those are people that are registered known sex offenders, gang members. They're running drugs, they're running guns, they're running criminals, trying to smuggle them across. Because people who are coming here that are family units, they want to be apprehended because then they subsequently get released. But for those that know that once they get apprehended by Border Patrol and processed, they'll be identified as a criminal with a prior history and subsequently deported, they seek to get away. So we have 500,000 gotaways that we know of. There's probably close to 1 million just from this year in our country doing God knows what. And for people who think, well, I'm in Florida, or I'm in New York, or I'm in Montana, how does that impact me? Every town in America is a border town. It is the narcotics that are pouring in. We just had the numbers of historic record-breaking overdoses and deaths from fentanyl. In our country, just this year alone, we have seen enough fentanyl that has been apprehended and seized to kill every man, woman, and child in America 6 times over. The drugs that get through security, that make it across the border, become only more valuable as they make their way inland. And that puts our frontline defenders on the hook and even in more danger. So my husband, who is a SWAT medic and a firefighter, he sees these situations all the time. We have people in our community that had very good lives, and now they are somehow hooked on an opioid, on a drug, and they are called frequent flyers. They overdose frequently, and there's going to be a time when they just push it too far. But that strain on our first responders, our local police and fire, that puts a strain on the entire system. So while you are waiting for people to clear a call, there could be a real crisis happening on the other side of town that they are not going to be able to get to because resources have been pulled in. It's a ripple effect across the board from what is happening at the Southwest border to every town in America. And it's from the very basic health aspect of, folks coming across, bringing COVID, bringing other diseases. They're not being quarantined, they're not being tested, to the crime element, to the just basic human rights of what we're seeing with the trafficking. Trafficking happens in every town in America. And this is only exacerbating that by bringing in new victims to traffic. And so it's a really, really horrific situation.
It really is. Yeah, AMAC was down there. We felt it important to get down there because we said, and when we went down to Del Rio, Texas, I thought, how could we have a president and vice president that aren't down here, that aren't working with these great men and women that are doing all they can in the state of Texas to protect American citizens who have homes and property? They're concerned. Their lives are literally, they're going to sleep in fear. Not to mention, as you said, the drugs that are coming through, the young girls that are being raped and human trafficked. It is such a terrible situation there. And I think their pride and to admit that they were wrong, their hatred for Donald Trump and the good policies that he had in place are blinding them to the truth. And that is exactly what I pray will come back to bite them. And I do pray that we'll see some changes. This has been just such a wonderful interview, Congresswoman. I really appreciate your leadership. It's so important. I do want to ask you a final question, sort of over the horizon, a look ahead. If you had a crystal ball, as you see everything that's happening in Congress right now and the issues before our nation, what do you think the possibilities are in 2022? Do you think that Americans can begin to reclaim our noble history, our freedom from government overreach, economic liberties and such. Do you think that 2022 could see the House, Senate, or both even change hands?
Absolutely. I think you're going to see a red wave. And I think for sure the House, it's already a foregone conclusion up here in Washington, D.C. It will be a Republican-led House. And I do think we will take the Senate. I feel very optimistic and encouraged every day that we are going to take our country back. And it starts with the House and the Senate.
Thank you so much, Kat. Can you share with us some parting words? You mentioned that you're back down in DC, that you were called. Tell us a little bit about the votes coming up.
Oh my goodness. So we have a debt ceiling increase vote that we're going to be addressing this week. And, you know, that's a really, really tough issue because you're dealing with a lot of past spending. And it's unfair for us to continue to increase the limit on our credit card without making some very serious reforms. And the thing that I would encourage everyone to really look at as we move forward is stay away from the clickbait headlines. These issues are so complicated. There's nothing easy about running or governing a country. And I think it's time that we get to a place where thoughtful leadership is really championed, because we live in a world now where it's a lot of one-liners and hot takes, and they sound great and it makes people get fired up. But we really need to be thoughtful and very curious going into the legislative season ahead, because we're dealing with real policies that impact real lives. And I myself know firsthand what happens when people don't read the bills. So I think going into this week, you know, one of the things I do is I read all the bills. I really look for ways to work within the process to get a better outcome. And if all else fails, vote no. There's not a whole lot of good that you can vote for when Nancy Pelosi is championing it. Oh, man.
Very good point. Oh, thank you so much. Your voice, your positions, your energy, your commitment, and your record in Congress, it really is so encouraging. And our AMAC members are so active. And as you know, your leadership is a great example of what can be done and why we have such a wonderful country that we live in. So thank you for having the personal courage and the resilience and just such a wonderful can-do attitude to be where you are doing all that you are doing. I cannot tell you how important this is for our members and for all of those listening. So thank you again, and know that AMAC continues to fight for the values in our Bill of Rights, for the American dream, and for the future.
You guys are awesome. I can't thank you enough. Your members and your entire team are wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank everyone out there listening, especially those members. Thanks for tuning in today. And if you haven't downloaded the AMAC News app, you can watch, you can listen to this show and track breaking news on the news app that you can't get anywhere else. So please make sure to hit the subscribe button, follow, like, and share wherever you are on social media. Until next time, everyone, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here. God bless you and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Better for America podcast. To learn more about AMAC and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.